Hello and welcome back. This is Thinking Like a Geographer, an AP Human Geography test review. This is one of our intro videos, so make sure that you are watching these intro videos before you start on the first content module, which is population. Today we're going to be looking at a slightly different topic than that might be unfamiliar to some of you, and some of you may know what it is, and that's called Bloom's taxonomy. And once again, Bloom's taxonomy. This course in general is designed to help you think geographically as opposed to just learn test taking skills. That is part of what we're doing, but thinking the way the geographers think and learning how to do these things. And Bloom's taxonomy is a very important part of that process. So um, let's get started. So what is a taxonomy? What do you mean with this funny word about taxonomy? What does that mean? You may be familiar with the word taxonomy from science. So we're going to look at today an example from biology. So biology, for example, groups all of life into categories based on similar characteristics. Okay, so if you've had a biology class or you're currently taking a biology class, chances are you've run into this concept of taxonomy, and that is we take human life and we divide it into different groups based on the characteristics that things have in common. So, for example, plants, animals, protozoans, fungus, even at the prokaryotic and eukaryotic level, there is these broad categories of what things have in common. So, for example, in biology, here is our example. We start with kingdom being the broadest, meaning everything in the kingdom has things in common, when species being the most specific. And so that's where we're going to start this conversation today, is looking at the biology level, and then we'll move on to what Bloom's taxonomy is. Okay? All right, so we'll start off with this idea. For example, let's go back a slide. If we look at kingdom, we're assuming that everything in the kingdom has things in common. Okay, so for example, humans and plants are not in the same kingdom. They are different, right? They are very different, and so they are not the same. So they're not in the same kingdom. There's this obvious differentiation between plants and human beings. Plants and fish, however, and there's Nemo. Nemo has joined us today. Um, are both animals, and therefore they are in the same kingdom. So we'll put a check mark. So at the broadest level, there are similarities between these things. As you go more specific, there's more differences, and that's why we differentiate out different types of things. So if we look, for example, at polar bears, all right? So if we look at here, we see polar bears are in the kingdom Animalia, but they're also in the same kingdom as snakes and starfish and foxes and squirrels, who are nothing like them at all. But because they are in the same kingdom, they are. So there's on the very broadest level, there are similarities. But you'll notice that as we go down, we see that the number of types of animals that go into those categories gets fewer and fewer and fewer. When we get to Carnivoria, we've dropped out the starfish and the snake and the animal, the squirrel. And when we get to all the way down to the bottom, the only thing there is the polar bear. So keep this idea in mind. We're not going to talk about biology much today, other than just giving you this example of categorizing things based on commonality. And that's what we want to keep in mind today as we move forward into how this concept of taxonomy relates to human geography. All right, so Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy is not a taxonomy of living things, but it is a taxonomy of thinking. It's a taxonomy of how your brain works, of cognitive processing. And so, just like our previous example of animal taxonomies, Bloom's taxonomy is going to sort things and categorize things based on the type of thinking and knowledge and cognitive processing that it requires. To do this, we have to assume that not all learning requires the same type and amount of processing by your brain. Okay, for example, if I ask you, what is your name? That is not a hard concept for you to recall. You should know your name. You should be able to give it right back to me immediately. You've done it 1,000 times. However, if I ask you to reflect on how your experiences last Thanksgiving affect your life, that's going to require more cognitive processing. You have to think about some things. You may have to compare. You may have to define some things. And so there's different cognitive processes based on what you need to do with a particular activity or particular question or challenge or problem. So not all thinking is the same. So Bloom's taxonomy is a way to organize learning based on what types of processing your brain has to do when you learn something new. So when new information comes in, what do you do with it? And what does your brain have to do? And that's where Bloom's comes in, because Bloom sorts things into these categories. So in other words, it attempts to classify learning based on the amount and types of thinking that goes on. So if we go back to our biology example, one type of thinking may be animals, like animals, where there's lots of different types of thinking that fit in one category. But as we get more specific, we may have more or fewer different things that fit into that category. All right. Here's what our taxonomy looks like. Okay, we start at the bottom with what we call knowledge, and we move up in complexity and sophistication, and some would argue difficulty as we go on. Understanding, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. And we'll talk about what these things mean. Let me give you kind of a real quick analogy of what this looks like. Okay, a kind of um, a kind of metaphor for Bloom's taxonomy. So I'm walking down the street and next to a river. Oh, by the way, when I was in high school, I was a lifeguard. So back in the day, I had some basic life-saving skills and training and preparation. So I'm walking down the street and I notice someone is having trouble in the river. They're falling in the river and they're starting to struggle to swim. So the first thing that I might do is I might say, I have knowledge of how to save this person. I know how to swim. I know the different carry techniques. I know how to support someone in the water. I know CPR. I have knowledge of that. However, while that knowledge is important, that having that knowledge does not save that person. There has to be some other activities done on my part in order to do that. Okay. And so this is where we get into the different levels of thinking. So understanding might say, yeah, I have this knowledge and I really know what it means. I know the implications of having this knowledge. So I can stand on the side of the river and I can think about my knowledge and what it means, but that person still in the water and still isn't being helped. So knowledge and understanding are very internal processes. They're helpful and useful in many ways, but they are kind of internal to the individual more so than outward. Application is, how do I use this in a particular situation? So once I've thought about my knowledge and contemplated what it means, then I actually have to do something, right? I have to go into the water and save the person. Otherwise, what purpose and good was that knowledge? Okay. Analysis might say something like, okay, now that this person has fallen in and been saved, let's look around and see if we can figure out why this happened and what we can do to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Okay, so we're going to look around and we may see um, this person was a bad swimmer and this person slipped on some ice and fell in, or this person's car ran off the road and they fell in the water. So I'm doing some analysis there. So, but the point of the analysis is to try to understand and get a good understanding of the reasons why something happened. Synthesis is, okay, how do we prevent this? Okay, we know how it happened, we know what happened. Let's build barricades, or let's put in better street signs or things like that, so that people can know. So that's a creating kind of process. And the last one is evaluation. How well has that worked? How well have those things worked in order to prevent and help to save people? So as we go up the the thought chain here, it becomes more and more and more complex and more relevant to daily life and existence, and not just to the individual. Some people look at Bloom's in the opposite way in terms of its shape and how it's laid out, with the lower level things at the bottom still, but with the um, uh, pyramid being inverted or upside down, so that you actually are spending most of your time at the top as opposed to at the bottom. This is a way that I like to think about it. Most teachers would prefer, I think, this model in terms of having you thinking and creating and evaluating and analyzing as much as possible, and doing remembering and understanding only when necessary to get you to that top level. So this idea that so this idea that there is um, a relationship between the amount of time that you spend on this. Here's another way to look at this. Once again, the remembering is the smallest circle, and then the bigger the circle, the more time that you really should spend on these particular topics. Here's kind of an artsy, pretty way to look at it. You've got knowledge here of the trees. And you see the sunset and the create and analyze and apply. So it's all kind of woven together to create this image and this picture. And once again, there are our verbs that we want to look at. Okay. All right. So let's apply this concept to human geography. Okay. So knowledge exhibits previously learned material by recalling facts, terms, basic concepts, and answers. Okay. So for example, what are Ravenstein's laws of migration? If you can list them, then you have met the knowledge level requirement. I know what they are. So you could talk about, migration to urban centers, and you could talk about young people migrating more than older people. But do you really know what those things mean? That's not what knowledge is asking. It's just want to say, do you know what the laws are? Okay, next one is comprehension. Comprehension is demonstrating understanding of facts and ideas by organizing, comparing, translating, interpreting, giving descriptions, and stating main ideas. Okay? So an example of that may be describe the factors that might induce an individual to migrate. So here we're talking about not just what are the laws, but why might somebody move? So this question is kind of flipping it around, and now you have to think about, why would somebody leave? Well, they might leave because of, reason X, Y, and Z. So we're going beyond just understanding the law and knowing the law to, what's motivating people in these situations. Application, problem solving by applying acquired knowledge, facts, critiques, and rules. So I'm sorry, techniques and rules in a different way. Example, a local government wants to better serve recent immigrants. How can understanding of laws of migration help the city in their decision making? So once again, we're still looking at migration patterns and reasons for migration. So understanding laws of migration, how can that help them? Well, maybe it will help them in that we understand where people come from, why they come from, where they end up. But here we're taking it and we're putting it in a new situation. So it's not just, do you know this, but here's a group or person or context that needs to use that knowledge for something. Okay, so applying it is about using it for something. This is the first time in this cognitive process that you're going to have to be asked to use it, as we talk about application. Analysis, examining and breaking information down into parts by identifying motives or causes, making references and finding evidence to support generalizations. Example, a local county clerk has noticed a large increase in the number of marriage licenses issued to immigrants. What conclusions can be drawn about the relationship between marriages and immigration? So once again, we have this phenomenon, we have this thing happening around us. What does it mean? And how can this particular knowledge understanding help us really get to the point where we understand and have a good grasp of that. So in this particular case, there may be some connection between the age of immigrants. There may be some connection between the status of immigrants in terms of the marital status of immigrants. It may mean that there's a lot of immigration of students who are coming on student visas, that there may be immigration patterns amongst some younger people that are here long enough to reach marrying age or that age. But those are all things that ways that those laws of migration and those migration knowledge can help inform and analyze this particular problem of migration. Synthesis says compiling information together into a different and Synthesis says compiling information together in a different way by combining elements in a new pattern or proposing alternative solutions. So we're taking what we know and we're using it in some different ways. An example of this might be Senior Citizen Center of a local town wants to help recent immigrants settle into their new country and homes. Create a plan that they can use to meet the needs of this particular group. Okay, so here we have come up with a plan. Use that knowledge to create something, to build something, to um, solve a problem and create a solution. So very much like I said, oh, well, we're going to put barricades up to keep people from falling in the river. We're going to do the same types of things with um, the synthesis level of other particular concepts. Finally, evaluate, which is presenting and defending opinions by making judgments about information, validity of ideas, or quality of work based on a set of criteria. After several years of working with immigrants, a local church has not seen the kind of results it had intended. They have asked you to recommend changes to this program in order to improve results. So once again, here the concept is we're evaluating. Did this work? Is this what we want? Is this getting the kind of results that we want? And if not, how do we change it? So we're using a criteria to evaluate. So how do you know? So how do you know when you're looking at something what the cognitive level is? Well, and that's a challenge. Most often what you do is you want to look at the verb that's used in the question or task. So what verbs are being used and how does that inform our decision? So one of the things, the files that you had attached when you uh, in the module before you started the video was this Bloom's taxonomy action verbs sheet. And this kind of divides up those 6 categories and lists particular verbs for them. And these verbs are very common verbs with these different cognitive processes and helps us understand kind of where these things fall. So if you have not looked at that, you should do so. I've gone ahead and did a screenshot of it, put it up on the page for you so you can see it. But for example, if we go back to our previous synthesis example, it says create a plan that they can use to meet the needs of this group of people. Once again, we're talking about the Senior Citizen Center wanting to help these immigrant groups, right? All right. Well, the word there is create. The verb there is create. If we look at the chart, we see that create is a synthesis verb. That tells us what's going on. So we see create, we should immediately start thinking, okay, this is a higher level thinking skill. They're going to want me to take information and use it in a new way and to create something new and different. Okay. We could look at the describe. So describe the factors that might induce an individual to migrate. So this was our comprehension or understanding level of cognitive process. And if we look at the verb there is describe, there it is under the comprehension category. So we can use these verbs to kind of inform our decisions and our thinking about what these questions or tasks are asking us to do. All right, here are some resources. Hopefully this has been beneficial. I really highly recommend that you use both the Bloom's Taxonomy action verbs link and this writing objectives using Bloom's Taxonomy. from the University of North Carolina, Charlotte, moving forward. We're going to use these probably every video, so you might want to bookmark these and so you can have them available when we start into the modules and looking at the specific types of questions. So that's all I have for today. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to our next session, and we'll see you then.